Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Our service today is entitled Juneteenth and Our First UU Principle. Novelist James Baldwin said, "History, as nearly no one seems to know, is not merely something to read. And it does not refer merely or even principally to the past. On the contrary, the great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us, are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways, and history is literally present in all that we do. It could scarcely be otherwise, since it is to history that we owe our frames of reference, our identities, and our aspirations." Again, I'm Don West Jr., and today is Father's Day 2022. And I'd like to wish all the fathers and everybody doing fatherly things a happy Father's Day. Being a junior begs that there must also be a senior, and there is a senior, so I'd like to wish a happy Father's Day to my dad. Many find it a challenge to live up to their father's example. I'm no exception. I regularly fall short of the mark he sets daily for our family. Why? Because my father's a beast. If he does it well. He does it right, he does it correctly, he does it, and he does it till it's done, no matter what. He doesn't speak much, but when he does, it means a lot. My father was a track star in high school. He won the Penn relays, the high school boys 4x400 relay. He went on to run track at Penn State University. He's the reason I'm named Donald. Hearing his track lore and legend inspired me to be a high hurdler myself, just like my dad. Every day I look to emulate his example. That's my father. So happy Father's Day to him. Happy Father's Day to everyone. Today is also June 19th. Juneteenth is a special day of remembrance, a freedom jubilee. 157 years ago today, the message of the Emancipation Proclamation, a message freeing the slaves in the Confederate States, a message that took 2.5 years to deliver, was delivered by Union General Gordon Granger in Galveston, Texas.
My name is Marcia Chatelain. I'm a professor of history and African American studies at Georgetown University. I'm a historian of African American life and culture. Juneteenth is a commemoration holiday of June 19, 1865, when a group of African Americans in Galveston, Texas, received the news that they indeed were free. President Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, but news of the end of slavery in Texas had not traveled to this community until 1865. Since then, Juneteenth has been a day of commemoration of the struggle against slavery and a celebration of freedom. One of the biggest misconceptions about Juneteenth is that people often think that was the day that slavery ended in the United States. But in fact, the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in the United States, was passed in the Senate on April 8, 1864, and the House on January 31st, 1865. Although Juneteenth celebrates the knowledge that slavery had ended, it's important to remember that the conditions that mirrored slavery, whether it was Jim Crow or the suppression of civil rights or continued struggles to fight racism, those continued long after the end of slavery. And so the Juneteenth holiday reminds us of where we've come, and it also inspires us to think about the places we want to go. As African Americans left the South, to pursue opportunities throughout the 20th century in northern and western cities, the celebration of Juneteenth moved from being a Texas-based celebration to a national one, in which people gathered with families and friends and community to remember the incredible struggle of a people against slavery and to create new traditions that allowed them to reflect about the struggle for civil rights and the ongoing struggle against racism. Although slavery was abolished in 1865, the fight for civil rights has continued to the present day. So Juneteenth provides people with a sense of encouragement and inspiration to continue to fight on behalf of their community and their families for freedom. And it also is a holiday that, as it continues to become more and more popular, it allows people to look back at the past and encourages them to learn more about African American history. As more and more institutions recognize Juneteenth and work to commemorate the incredible legacy of slavery in the United States, I hope Juneteenth becomes a day where people commit not only to acts of justice in their local community, but to investigate history in a more deep and thoughtful way.
The professor's final words are meaningful to me. She challenges us to investigate history in a deeper and more thoughtful way. Let's pause and think about what that means. To investigate history in a more deep and thoughtful way. As I showed earlier, in Unitarian Universalism, we promote 7 principles. It was the first principle that hooked me when I first came to the UUFLB. Mike shared that he came 7 years ago for the first time. And the first time that I came, I followed our treasurer, Tom. I tell that story. I followed him in. And when I got there, I sat down and I started to read the back of the program. And the first thing I read on the back of the program was the first principle, because the 7 principles are printed on the back of the program. And for me, when I read that first principle, the inherent dignity and worth of every person, I thought that was a very, very bold proclamation. And then something else very unique happened for me that day. Right after the service started, one of our members who's no longer with us, her name is Jean Roan, she was in a wheelchair and she got rolled in and she sat right next to me and she engaged me and she invited me into her life. She invited me into her home. And through that act of kindness and that open sharing, Jean and I became friends. And I have Pat Winger here with me today, and we became friends. And I'm still with you here today and have the honor of delivering this service to you on Father's Day and Juneteenth. So the inherent worth and dignity of every person. What a bold and daring exclamation. Ask yourself for a moment, what does that mean to you? Is it something you believe is possible? Is it something that you believe in? And then I guess we have to ask, do we practice it in our daily lives? The views that made slavery possible, the mental construct that allows you to reduce to 3/5 of a person, a whole person, those views are in direct conflict with our first principle. So let all that percolate. Keep the first principle and these questions in mind as we move through the rest of this service. So for the 13th Amendment, which is what legally ended slavery across the United States. For it to become law, it required a vote in the House and the Senate and ratification by 3/4 of the states. At the time, we had 36 states. So to be ratified, 27 state legislatures needed to also vote on the amendment. As Professor Chatelain shared in the video, the Senate passed the 13th Amendment on April 8th, 1864. The House passed it on January 31st, 1865. Now here I put the language up for you, and I highlighted the exceptions clause of the 13th Amendment. That exceptions clause means you can still be reduced to slavery or involuntary servitude under certain conditions if you're duly convicted of a crime. The documentary film 13th explores the impacts of the exceptions clause. Highly informative documentary, also highly recommended if you haven't seen it. Now, let's go back a little bit in time. President Lincoln, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, and the Emancipation Proclamation freed all of the slaves only in the Confederate States. And then another thing happened in history. On April 5th, 1865, General Lee surrendered at Appomattox. That ended the Civil War. So all of these things together are what people commonly believe are what changed the United States and ended slavery and involuntary servitude here. So we had to ratify the 13th Amendment. So you'll see Illinois was the first state to ratify it. They did it on February 1st, 1865. Georgia was the 27th. When Georgia ratified it, it officially became the law of the land in the United States. And I just highlighted a couple other places. I was curious where Alabama stood because I grew up in Alabama. As you guys know, I'm currently in Las Vegas, Nevada. I was born and spent my first years in Pennsylvania. So it's interesting because eventually all 36 states ended up ratifying the 13th Amendment. So you can see here, you guys may be interested. California was a little late to the game, but they still got it done in 1865. They were still within the same year, as was Florida, although they had to reaffirm it in 1868. But check it out. It took 2.5 years to get the message of the Emancipation Proclamation to Texas, and it took Texas 5 years to ratify the 13th Amendment. But although Texas was late to the game, Mississippi, they took a little bit longer. They didn't ratify it until February 7th, 2013. So there's some reasons why Texas took 5 years, and there's reasons why Mississippi took 148 years to ratify these amendments. And they have a lot to do with the way we see the world and the way we behave in it today, which is what our opening quote was trying to put out. But also there's something to celebrate, because even though it was on a long arc of 148 years, everyone eventually came around. So the additional lesson there is don't hold your breath, right? So let's take another look at our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Keep that in mind, the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
Yeah, well, in the telling of history, as you well know, and you deal with this in your new book on Baldwin, and maybe we can get to that too. There are little lies, there's small truths, big truths, there are little lies, and then there are big lies. You know, little lies are this happened here and not there, or whatever, dates. But a big lie is a story that just sinks deeply into a culture. It becomes part of a cultural identity. It becomes an origin story. It becomes the story in which people want to believe they're living. And that is kind of what the lost cause became. And here was the dilemma. Now, this is kind of the, an argument at the heart of that book, Race and Reunion, is that in the wake of the Civil War, the country had to put itself back together politically, legally, socially, and even try to do it morally and racially. But it had this struggle between these two profound ideas. One of them was healing, but the other was justice. And you just had this massive civil war that slaughtered over 700,000 people, emancipated 4 million people from slavery, also in a very bloody process. We forget that sometimes. Emancipation didn't just come about because people moved somewhere. There's a big death toll in emancipation itself, a number we may never fully know. But how do you have healing and justice in a society that has just experienced this kind of civil war, and in a society now with its most profound problem in its history, its identity, its law has always been race. It has always been slavery. And now you get a reinvention of that. You get a reinvention in the 3 great amendments to the Constitution, a second founding, as we so often call it now, a second constitution, as we so often call it now. But that was a revolution, a transformation. And as always, revolutions cause counter-revolutions. And one of the most powerful counter-revolutions we've ever experienced is the counter-revolution of the white South through the then Democratic Party, a counter-revolution of white supremacy that slowly but surely, actually rather rapidly, took back control of their societies, their state governments, and their futures across the South. And what in the end occurs is that you never really do have healing and justice. Healing for whom? Justice for whom? The trouble with what happened to the memory of the Civil War and the end of slavery in this country is that we never found a balance between that healing and justice. But maybe, just maybe, what we are experiencing now, well, first of all, we know we are experiencing now yet another reckoning with that story. And the fact that so many of the protesters now in small towns in Virginia, in large cities, in Richmond itself, are actually going to the Confederate monuments to engage in their protests, and in some cases are tearing them down, tells us that whatever level on which they understand all that history, they know how important that past was in creating the world in which they now are living. So we're having a reckoning with police violence, we're having a reckoning with law, we're having a reckoning on all kinds of levels, but one of the reckonings we're really having now is with our past.
Public memory, American memory. What is our public memory? What is our American memory? So I'm going to ask you a question. Juneteenth and the events in Galveston took place 148 years ago today. 148 years ago. So here's the question. Think back, and when did you first learn about these facts in any shape, form, or fashion? When did you first learn of Juneteenth, learn of General Gordon? And just answer that question and hold it to yourself for a second. I can tell you exactly when it was for me. Not exactly, more roughly. It was about 3 or 4 years ago. And so I was thinking 148 years, but I didn't hear about it until 3 or 4 years ago. So I was curious and did a little investigation to prepare myself for you guys today. And I asked my dad and his siblings the same question to get a sense of when they first heard of Juneteenth, because They're in their late 60s and early 70s, much older than me. So I wanted to know what their experience was.
Let's go back, backtrack a minute. So you talked about Juneteenth, and you said some of the purposes of what you're doing so you could have a proper, presentation for Juneteenth. I don't recall, people here in the North, because Juneteenth it started as a Texas holiday. And those two states surrounding Texas. So I don't recall us doing anything for Juneteenth per se, what we did back then, unless you guys remember something.
Well, I just remember one of the school teachers. One day, Irma and I were sitting out on the back, and I don't remember any of the school teachers' names, but it was one of the male school teachers. And he was from someplace in the South. And I don't know, I want to say Kentucky, someplace, but he had no place to stay, and he was staying with Granddaddy. And he was saying that they were discussing Juneteenth out at Carver. He taught at Carver. And that was the very first time that I ever heard about Juneteenth and someone in Culpeper actually talking about it.
Heard about it till I was in the service.
Yeah.
I never heard about it.
And this was a dude from Texas.
I never heard about it.
Yeah. And then I knew about it.
Joanne? When did you first hear about it, Joanne?
Huh?
When do you think you first heard about it?
Like recently, in the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, we never discussed it in Black History at Fisk, and we had Black History at Abington. I had never heard of that before.
So that's what I was telling Uncle, because me and Uncle Gary had this conversation offline, right? And I feel like it's in the last 3 or 4 years that I first learned of it in any shape, form, or fashion. And I didn't have it in high school, but I have a minor in African American Studies from Florida State, and I don't remember it being mentioned not one time in any way, in any reference anywhere. It's like it was hidden.
Well,
I didn't.
Well,
I had to research it myself once I heard about it.
yeah, and I didn't.
My experience with Juneteenth occurred in the last 3 or 4 years. I did take African American History Studies as junior at Abington High School, or senior, I can't recall exactly what year now. And that came about because of a protest that my brother Garland was involved with other students to offer African American history and ethnic studies as part of the curriculum at Abington. And after him protesting with the other students, and there was suspensions and perhaps expulsion, a court case was filed that eventually was thrown out, and the Board of Education decided to add both the ethnic studies and the African American history as part of the curriculum. And so it was very successful. Many students at our high school signed up, but I don't recall Juneteenth being a part of that. We use John Hope Franklin's textbook, Up From, I can't recall, is it Up From Slavery?
That's it, Up From Slavery.
Yeah, it was his Up From Slavery. And there was a syllabus associated with that class, and I don't recall Juneteenth being a part of that curriculum. So that was my recollection of Juneteenth. Just don't remember it as being a part of any of my academic studies in high school or college.
but as I told you, Don, on a professional level, I learned about Juneteenth in 2001 when Safeway acquired Gennardi's. And Safeway operates, their corporate headquarters is in Lanham, Maryland. And Juneteenth is a big thing in the DC metro area. They have a big parade and everything. And Safeway is one of the corporate sponsors of the parade every year. Now,
Juneteenth, it happened 148 years ago. So we have public memory, American memory. Huge segments of the country just did not know about this brilliant historical fact. Why? If it were today, perhaps the answer would be the strident opposition to critical race theory. With my aunt and uncles, we're talking about 70 years ago, so it wasn't Governor DeSantis. What I hope you're seeing are some common threads from our history to our present day. And let's take ourselves back to our first principle. The inherent dignity and worth of every person. So everyone says 3 or 4 years ago, many of us did. So I'm going to tell you about a story real quickly about the grandmother of Juneteenth. In 2017, Opal Lee, she was 89 years old, and she's from Fort Worth, Texas. And she decided to push to make Juneteenth a paid federal holiday. So she started walking from Fort Worth, Texas to Washington, D.C. She started doing this when she was 89 years old. And in no small part, the reason that so many of us say 3 or 4 years ago is because of Opal Lee's efforts and the publicity that she brought to it. So they call her the grandmother of Juneteenth. And as the grandmother of Juneteenth, she directly gives us a message for the future.
We need to band together and try to work out the disparities that exist in our schools, in our healthcare system, jobs. The pay needs to be equal for everybody doing the same job. There's so many things that need to be addressed. We need to work together to eradicate these disparities.
In the words of the grandmother of Juneteenth, we need to work together to eradicate inequality and the disparities that exist. I was curious what Miss Opal was up to. So I did some Googling last night, and she's still alive. She's 95 years old, and yesterday morning, she led a 2.5-mile walk in Fort Worth, Texas, as part of the Juneteenth celebration in Fort Worth. And then I also learned that she's opening a new Juneteenth museum. So I found this clip on ABC 8, and I'm going to share it with you.
Well, this Sunday marks Juneteenth, the federal holiday commemorating the emancipation of enslaved African Americans. Freedom Day is a big celebration, and the grandmother of Juneteenth, Miss Opal Lee, has a new project, bringing the National Juneteenth Museum to Fort Worth. It is a big development for the city's historic South Side neighborhood. Here's Scoop Jefferson.
Scoop! Wait till I tell the girls I met Scoop.
Affectionately known as the grandmother of Juneteenth.
Is this volume right now all right?
Yes, yes.
At the age of 95, Miss Opal Lee is not slowing down thanks to family.
Granddaughter of the grandmother of Juneteenth.
Dion Sims will serve as the founding executive director of the National Juneteenth Museum.
We took 1,500,000 signatures to Congress. We got a call
to go to the White House.
The groundbreaking will happen in the fall of 2022 here at East Rosedale and Evans Avenue. Opal Lee has owned this property since the 1990s.
Folks have tried to buy it from her, and she's like, no, no.
No, because Lee saw it as an economic development opportunity one day.
All right.
That day is now here.
I wanted to do a holy dance, but the kids say when I do that, I'm twerking, whatever that is.
Miss Opal, keeps poking us in the back. She's like, I want to see it before I have to go. So y'all make sure to, work as fast as you can.
The financing for the museum involves a huge price tag with corporate and community donations.
$70 million, because the Juneteenth Museum is not only just a museum, it also has economic redevelopment components to it.
Unlike the current Juneteenth Museum, the National Museum will include a retail space, lodging, all while celebrating the end of slavery.
When the Juneteenth Museum opens here at Rosedale and Evans, Sims wants people to know it will be so much more than just how slavery impacted African Americans.
Whites, blacks, working together for the common good of emancipating the previously enslaved. The Southern Underground Railroad into Mexico. Mexico abolished slavery in 1824.
Sims also shared they will use the date June 19th as a symbolic number for everyone to help build the museum.
They're going to be giving $6.19 so they can have a part to say, I helped build that.
In Fort Worth.
Get to know the older people in your neighborhood because they've got something to offer.
Well, this Sunday marks Juneteenth.
If you'd like to support the museum, here's the information. There's their website, and there's a QR code that'll take you directly to their donation page. Such a worthy project. So it brings us back. The inherent worth and dignity of every person. All of the things that we're celebrating today are at the center of the bullseye of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And I'm going to go back to my slides here. Give me 1 second. And I'm going to bring back up our 7 principles. The inherent dignity and worth of every person. So Juneteenth, for me and my family, it's with the exception of my Uncle Gary, for all of us, it's a new holiday, and it requires us to create new traditions. It's almost as if we were the first people to ever learn of Christmas. And we have to say, what is our family gonna do with this Christmas? And it's the same for our family. So I challenge you today to think about the inherent dignity and worth of every person, how that principle applies to your life and the way that you live your life. And then I challenge you to think about how you're going to incorporate Juneteenth into your ritual, into your custom, into your family, and into your community. And what are you going to do with that newfound knowledge? The grandmother of Juneteenth, I listened to a lot of things, and one of the things she said is there's a lot of education and that we must learn. And for me, that brought me back to the film series that we did in 2020 with A.J. Ali and Love being the answer. And the dignity and worth of every person. At the core of that for me is love, and then love being the answer, AJ turned love into an acronym. And with the Grandmother of Juneteenth's admonition, we want to learn about the people in our community. And then we want to unconditionally open our hearts to their needs as if they were our immediate family members. We want to volunteer to be a part of the solution in their life during both the good and the challenging times. And then we want to empower everyone we meet to do the same as if their lives depended on it. Love, the dignity and worth of every person. Happy Father's Day. Happy Juneteenth. Think about how you can live the first principle in your everyday life, how you can learn more about your community. And with that, we're going to take it to the lovely Carol Cole for our closing hymn.